G'day, Jim Hart here. I have to check something on the audio front here. Gotta make sure I've only got one audio source in here. G'day, Jim Hart here. I have to check something on the audio front here. Good, much better. This really expensive computer, I don't like it. It sounds like crap when you use the microphone that comes with the computer. So I got another microphone plugged in. Hopefully that's going to make a difference. So the topic for today, borderline's emotions aren't yours to regulate. How many people who've been with somebody with borderline personality disorder have been trying, whether knowingly or not, to regulate their emotions? And this comes about really simply, really quickly, in the reality of when you're walking on those eggshells, you're trying for them not to, quote, go off, unquote. You're trying for them not to get triggered. You're trying to make everything be okay. All of that and more is you actually trying to regulate their emotions. And needless to say, of course it's not your responsibility. Understandable why people get into it, I guess, out of desperation to just try to make things work. But the reality there is that it doesn't work, and it doesn't help people, and you really can't help the person with BPD who just won't get treatment and doesn't learn how to regulate their own emotions, which that's kind of stating the obvious. Whoops, most people would think. I swear that phone's got a mind of its own. So, I want to get into a couple things here. Like, for example, this walking on eggshell thing. And people know what that means, right? But more to the point, you're not really walking on the eggshells. You're stomping on them, and you don't even mean to. But how do we walk on eggshells with that fragility and everything without cracking them, like smashing them, actually? So relationship anxiety is extremely high for most people in a relationship with BPD or who have codependency, and you're always wary of potentially tipping the balance of seemingly an innocent situation. And it can switch to conflict, high drama, chaos, and beyond in a heartbeat. And it's never really clear why. And there's, like I've done other videos, there's no closure on every episode of a person with BPD being triggered to dysregulated emotion, whatever they do in their patterns with that. You can't control it, but yet there's this such desire to kind of make it go away. But things can and do change at the drop of a hat. And the fragility of someone with BPD untreated, but the fragility of their moods, scares you on some level. Whether you're aware of that or not, it's like, it's so painful. So you may feel like you're on unstable ground, or maybe sometimes you're denying that, but that can come up. It depends where people are, or if you're still in the relationship, or if you're looking back at it now, or off and on, So people with codependency who are the partners of those with BPD, or who were, you're just going way out of your way to try to keep a peace that you can't keep, that isn't your responsibility, that isn't about you, why it's disrupted every 10 seconds, 10 minutes, 10 hours, 3 days, whatever it is. And even to your own detriment, people with codependency try to regulate the emotions of an untreated, unregulated borderline. So these following things, probably a lot of people know, but signs of an emotionally unstable relationship, what it is with a borderline, untreated. So if you are or you were walking on eggshells in any kind of relationship, but especially with someone with BPD, and let me add here, they're not all women. There's a high percentage of people with BPD that are men too. So there's a lot of women going through this as well as men, and then same-sex couples, etc. So if you find yourself walking on the eggshells, that's a big red flag to begin with. And as soon as you start to understand what's that about, it's one of those kind of tip in the scale moments that, why are you still there, right? And it indicates that there's an unstable and abusive relationship. Being upset is normal from time to time, but repeated behavior can say something more serious is going on. So triggered dysregulated emotion, yelling, acting in, the borderline acting in, acting out. Oh, I have to take a break, the taking a break, ghosting, all the other things that go on. So really, if people are still a little bit unsure or new to this, then you might want to check these following kind of indicators that it is a toxic relationship, and that no doubt you are with somebody with BPD. So one thing is mood checks, right? You check the other person's mood before you speak or do anything, usually, if not always, because just in case they're going to react or lash out, you're trying to prevent that, which is already attempting to regulate the borderline's emotions, which is just inevitably impossible. So, and then tension. Are you always or most often tense and on edge around the person with BPD or the partner, or maybe even still you have the sense of it in yourself if you're the ex of somebody with BPD? Do you find it difficult to relax yourself? Can you just relax and breathe into yourself, or maybe have you already lost yourself so much that seems impossible? And so emotions are running high all the time, and the other person has, of course, difficulty to the impossible task of trying to regulate their own emotions. They can't control their emotions. And so instead, they externalize out that lack of control, and they start, putting it all out on you. Do you find that you experience or have experienced humiliation and sarcasm? So you may really feel put down a lot, directly, and humiliated. Could be mocking, could be sarcasm, could be just really cutting, painful, cruel words. This can be from the way the other person speaks to you, screams and yells at you, or really poorly treats you. So there may be suggestions that you are suggestions. They may scream at you that you are a lesser person, that they know better than you. Of course, they're righter than you, right? They're not, but they're right fighting, and they think they're right. And they're trying to obfuscate and block any way or any chance you'd have to hold them accountable. So they'll act as if either they're the total victim and you're doing it to them while they're doing it to you, and or they'll feel less than and overcompensate for that by ensuring that you end up feeling like less than, and they get this false sense of, overcompensatory defensive entitlement, which is horrible to experience. There's a lot of nonverbal cues too, because you may be actively aware, or have been, or become aware of nonverbal cues that the other person is angry. Oh, can they let you know that without saying a word? In many different ways. And so there could be glaring looks, hand gestures, silence, could even be withdrawal, evasiveness. Objects can be thrown or handled aggressively, deep sighs. It's kind of endless, rolling their eyeballs, And then the impulsivity of people with BPD. The impulsive behavior is so frequent that it's become sort of quite, unquote, normal. Quote, normal, unquote. And then there can be sudden life-altering decisions made on their part that you have no say or input into. And obviously being ghosted is one of the biggest. And of course in these relationships, a lot of people already know extended arguments, right? These jade conversations, the disagreements and arguments that should be quickly resolved, but they never are, because people with BPD don't have they have the arrested emotional development, they don't have the emotional intelligence or the metacommunication or communication skills to ever say what they feel, because they don't trust anybody and they don't know themselves. And that's just the explanation. It doesn't make what they do okay. So they just will not let go, right? And the dispute lasts for hours or days or, yes, even weeks. And they can just go on and on and on with these jade conversations. You end up justifying, arguing, and defending and trying to explain yourself. They don't do that. They're obfuscating that and turning it back and making you defensive. And somehow you think that you're able, or maybe you're not consciously aware that this happened to you or is happening for you, somehow you think you're able to regulate their emotions. You can't even know what you're feeling half the time because you can't keep up. You can't catch up to all their defenses and what they're actually doing to you. So this can lead people into excessively self-monitoring themselves. You're trying to adapt your own actions constantly in an attempt to prevent setting the other person off, but you don't really set them off in the first place, which is really important to know. But this is what people believe, until they learn that that's not the case. And you second guess yourself in every situation and scenario, trying to anticipate how they will react. And that's walking on the eggshells that you can't help but break under your feet. So, you might start to withdraw from others in worst case scenarios. Long-term emotional and physical abuse, people withdraw into themselves. It's hard to get heard by even people that love and care about you. It's hard to be understood. People say just leave, and if you don't just leave, and of course it's more complicated than just leave, but you need to leave, people just don't understand. And then they start to judge you, even though they care about you. It's such a painful thing that happens to so many people. And so people often end up isolating themselves from friends and family because they just don't get it and they're not supportive. And, maybe in many of their cases, they're not even understanding how they're not there for you. But this matters to people too. And they might fear to some degree upsetting the other person. Like they don't want to become the next target, right? Or they begin to believe any negativity said to them is about themselves. That's more for people that are in the relationship. You begin to believe the borderline's narrative that you're somehow horrible and awful to blame for everything. And that can isolate people and make people not really want to reach out to other people anymore because you're feeling, now you really lost yourself and you're feeling really badly about yourself. And people with codependency have a dysfunctional, unhealthy relationship to and with self before all this starts. So it doesn't make it any better. So caring about someone, trying to love someone with borderline personality, especially untreated, tosses you on a roller coaster ride, right? From being loved and lauded to abandoned and bashed. And, it's no picnic for those with BPD, but of course, they're the ones that are perpetrating their lack of emotional dysregulation and everything else, and they don't take personal responsibility, etc. So they were victims in childhood in 87% of cases, but now they're visiting that on you. And even though it's not personal to you and they don't really see or hear you, you're the one getting hurt. So it's said that, people with BP live in unbearable psychic pain. And this can be true. But it doesn't give them the right to not, to just take no responsibility, not go to therapy, and think somehow you're supposed to help regulate them. Or you're supposed to just put up with their stuff. And you can't change what they're doing. So there's the drama, the excitement, the intensity, right? Some people enjoy the ride until a certain point in time. But things will never be calm. Things will never be the way that you hoped that they would be, the way that they seemed in the idealization and honeymoon phase. They'll never go back to that. So these are passionate, immediate beginning, stormy relationships, and they include accusations, anger, jealousy, bullying, control, breakup to makeup, breakup to makeup. due to a person with BPD is not only insecurity, but lack of self. So there is no gray, there is no gradual, there is no middle. It's all the black or the white. Never the black and the white, just the black or the white. And as I've said in videos recently to really bring this home clearly to people, splitting is the most major defense mechanism in for those with borderline personality. And they, people with BPD, they fluctuate dramatically, especially untreated, between idealizing and devaluing, right? And then suddenly and sporadically, this just shifts whenever it shifts, and you never know why. They don't know why either. So you never know what to expect or when to expect it. So there's so much drama. Borderline's intense, labile emotions elevate you when they're in good spirits and crush you when they're not. You're a prince or a princess, and then you're a bastard or a bitch. And if you're on the outs with them, all their bad feelings get projected onto you. They can be vindictive and punish you with words, silence, physically, other tactics, which feel manipulative and can be, well, they are to a degree, whether they know what they're doing or not, they are manipulative, and can be very destructive, not only to your self-esteem, they actually cost you knowing yourself anymore. People get really shattered and traumatized by this stuff. There's no way to minimize that. So people with BPD, when they shift away from that not balance, but that baseline mood state, they just depart from any sense of who they are, if they even know who they are at all. And then what you see is, quote, their norm, unquote. So they react, for all kinds of reasons, but yes, for largely the profound periods of abandonment with needy and clingy behavior, or alternately with the engulfment struggle with anger and fury that reflect their own skewed reality and self-image and past damage, and they don't know what they're feeling so much about, so they just think you must have made them feel it. And they're so desperate to be loved and cared for, but they're so hyper-vigilant for any real or imagined signs of rejection or abandonment. So if you're late coming home from work, or you cancel an appointment, or if you're dating and you can't make a certain date because maybe you're sick or something, you talk to someone, or talk to someone that they'll see or perceive or misperceive as competition. For them, trust is always an issue, and it leads to distortions from everything from distortions of reality to paranoia, and maybe even beyond that sometimes. So you're seen as either for or against them, and you must take their side, because in their right fighting they have to be right. Doesn't mean they're right at all, but they're right fighting, and so that's the black, or the all one-sided way they're going to see things. And if you dare defend their, quote, enemy, end quote, or try to justify or explain any slight they claim to have experienced, they may try to bait you into anger, provoke you into anger, and then falsely accuse you of rejecting them. So, and in some ways, people with BPD, because this is morphing, so more and more of them may well be gaslighting you. And whichever ways they do it, it's kind of fusing to be quite similar to the way narcissists do it. Doesn't make people with BPD narcissists, but there is more of a gaslighting component in BPD than there ever used to be, like, say, even 5-10 years ago. But they're trying to make you doubt your reality and your sanity. And in a way, I don't know about knowingly or unknowingly, but it can be an attempt to brainwash you. And it's likely not that knowingly, not that planned, but then there's various degrees of severity within BPD. So whether you're a man with a borderline woman, or a woman with a borderline man, or a man with a borderline man, or a woman with a borderline woman, I mean, all of these things that I talk about and more, and that you hear a lot about online, well, so many people are using the borderline woman, but borderline personality is not just a woman's thing. So they have this desperation for caring, and they often behave in ways that feel like emotional manipulation or that are abusive. So they'll cut off friends, relatives who betray them. It's very common. And of course, they'll cut off partners who they feel betrayed them too. So people with BPD really try to create this intimate romantic merger that you're not aware of it in the beginning when you meet them, right? But people with BPD equally fear the romantic intimate merger because they're afraid of being dominated or swallowed up by too much intimacy. So they don't receive your love. They don't feel ever close in any accepting, calm, or sort of okay way. And in a close relationship, they must walk a tightrope to balance the fear of being alone or being too close. This is the approach avoidance struggle I'm always talking about. And when they're trying to do that, they manipulate and control with commands and indirect maneuvers, and they might flatter you at one point, and they might. It's perceived as they're trying to reel in a partner, but is that what they're really doing? Are they just seeking, the rescue of parent and an identity through you, which even that isn't about you? So people with BPD use their anger and rejection to keep others at a safe distance. So people with BPD are frightened of a lot of things, and narcissists really enjoy being misunderstood. People with BPD really don't enjoy that at all. It's very triggering and painful for them. So people with BPD are dependent, and more than that, they're codependent too, and they find someone to merge with to help them, right? They don't know they're seeking rescue, but they are. But even if you could do it, they're going to make it impossible. Not that you can. They seek a person who can provide stability, and yet they don't know what to do with it. They don't recognize it. And balance, and trying to change their changeable emotions. That's where you get hooked in again to this codependent role where you're externalizing out stuff, and you really are trying to regulate their emotions. And unlike people with BPD, narcissists act self-sufficient and in control of their feelings. So it's a little bit different that way. And when people with BPD get with narcissists, that's not a match made in heaven. That's a match made in hell. That is a trauma bond on steroids. And borderlines don't fare very well in most of those relationships. But they will probably narc injure a narcissist on average more than somebody without BPD. But this idea that you got to be, in terms of males, a bad boy, because maybe then the borderline would love you more. No, they don't love you at all. They're not going to love you whether you treat them. I mean, the more you love them and the kinder you are to them, the less they know what to do with that. But even if you're treating them really poorly, or if you think that if you could have treated them poorly, they would have stayed with you, it just isn't true. Some of the worst misinformation out there. So, what else was I going to say here? People with BPD exercise control in different ways. So do codependents try to exercise control, for the good, for the better, for the trying to make it work out, for the trying to regulate the borderline's emotions and all of that. And this is done in different ways by people with codependency to those with BPD. But people who are the partners, often codependent individuals, you're also yearning for love. And you may also have your own fear of abandonment. Doesn't mean it's the same as somebody with BPD. And you already have low self-esteem as a codependent, poor boundaries. So people with codependency try to placate, accommodate, and apologize when attacked in order to maintain the emotional connection of the relationship, or more to the point, the trauma bond. But partners become emotional caretakers. They do sometimes to the point of self-sacrifice. Well, I would say almost always to the point of self-sacrifice and enabling, trying to rescue, trying to fix. Because in codependency, that pattern, you're trying to externalize out. You don't consciously know this. What your wounded inner child didn't get from a parent, you're trying to get from this emotionally unavailable person with BPD. So it's like the codependent and the borderline are both trying to settle the score of their past somehow together, but like it's a nightmare and a roller coaster and then some. So partners give over more and more control to the borderline and further seal or worsen to the point where you may have no self-esteem But the dependency, and then that addiction, and the Stockholm syndrome, and the cognitive, all the things that start to come into play in this strengthened toxic coupling of the trauma bond. People with codependency are trying to placate the borderline, and giving them control does not make either the partner more safe, and even if it makes the borderline feel more safe, it's an illusion. So people with BPD, they want to feel loved, but they'll never allow it, and they need to feel in control. So they need boundaries, right? But if you set a boundary, it doesn't really snap them out of their delusional thinking. It probably snaps them more into it. But it's important to call their bluff, though. It's important to stand up at some point. But then it's like, what's going to happen if you do, or when you do? So really, yeah, I don't want to get into where I was just going to go with that. Because people with codependency who start to try to get into, but you try to set boundaries, etc., with somebody with BPD, but if they're untreated, it just doesn't work. So this is just a little bit of how people with codependency, in obvious and not so obvious ways, end up, trying to regulate the borderline's emotions, and then not being aware of your own emotions, or not having even time or the ability to feel your own emotions anymore, because, like, oh my God, what's about to happen next? Rav, hi, Jay, hope you're enjoying the snowfall today. Yeah, there's quite a bit of it, isn't there? I woke up this morning to the loud sound of plows. Northern Pike. It's crazy how we think we can change the borderline. Yeah, but codependence in childhood, and it's not the same for everybody, but how that comes about is really because you were trying to get your needs met as a child, whatever that means for different people in what their lives are like as children. And so you end up in that pursuit role, and the trying to fix whatever is going wrong that you can't fix when you're a kid either. But this sets up that pattern, that pursuit pattern by the codependent, that externalization out pattern that, and in childhood it really is, and often people are young enough that it's to the point where there's no emotional safety, and you need that parent. You are pursuing something you absolutely need for your survival needs to be met, and it's very scary for kids. And then you end up doing this, so you're trying to change the parent, and then you end up doing it in adulthood too. And same thing, really, same mechanism. And this is why people with codependency need their own healing and recovery journeys, because you need to learn how to focus on self, how to, work on creating that healthy relationship to and with self that really is interrupted in people's childhoods with codependency in various different ways. And hey there, Luke. If you're split black, can the relationship ever work again, or is it a losing battle? Well, once you're split to black, it's like, can they come back and try again? Maybe, but they're never going to go back to that original idealization. Not that that was really all that it seemed like it was. And so really the relationships don't work, but people keep trying, sometimes in vain. And you said, I split with my ex because her cycles are getting shorter and shorter. Well, yeah, and they will only increase get shorter and shorter, to the point where there won't be cycles left, and there won't even be although I don't recommend you try another do-over. You said that those cycles are getting shorter and shorter between love you and hate you. Well, yes, between idealization and devaluation. Though many people with BPD will not get back to very much idealization. Some people feel like the borderline is idealizing you if they're not devaluing you, but often they just go back to a base mood state, and they don't go back to idealization exactly. And then they will continue to go to splitting and the devaluation side of things. And these cycles do speed up, and speed up often. When a relationship is on, off again, or, like these people with BPD these days, it's largely quiet borderlines that clients have talked to me about, but not always. But this But the taking a break ghosting borderline, right? I need to take a break. No, in healthy relationships, when people like without somebody having cluster B, etc., and codependency doesn't really help either the health of a relationship, really, but it's not the same as BPD. But if somebody needs a break from somebody, they don't go away and never talk to you or leave you wondering if the relationship is over or not. Like, I don't know, have you ever had a friend say, well, I'm really busy at work right now, so I need to take a break and I probably won't be in touch for a month or something. But they'll still maybe like once or twice they'll text you and they'll be like, how's it going? Or you'll text them or something. It's not like some cutoff thing. Dimebag, ever since my ex made contact for help, she's been calling me babe by accident. Well, think it's by accident, really? Then correcting herself straight away. Is this something or nothing? Well, I don't think it's nothing, and I don't think it's an accident. I think she's just testing you there, right? It's sort of like a tease and a manipulation, more likely than an accident. I don't want to disappoint myself overthinking it. Well, yeah, I just don't see why. Like, what do you think? Do you think it means? Do you think it's anything that you can possibly trust at all? Because I would suggest probably not, but I mean, it depends how you feel. And Mike, why do BPDs seek out abusive guys? I'm stable, and we dated for 4 months. She broke up with me, and 5 weeks later, she fell in love with a felon on probation. Do I have to worry about her coming back? Well, like you don't have to worry, but could she hoover back? Well, yeah, she could. When this invariably won't work out either. So you need to start strategizing, get into some therapy in your own healing recovery so that you can be strong enough to not, take her back, if she could. Like, because not all people with BPD do come back, but many, many, many do. And so to your other question, why do BPDs seek out abusive guys? Well, I don't think they're consciously aware. Like, hey, this guy's being too nice to me. Like maybe you, Mike, it was like, you're being too nice to her. I gotta go find a bad boy who's gonna really treat me like shit. They don't consciously know that, but the reason for that is, again, it's very impulsive, it's unconscious, and it's repetition compulsion. Often they're looking for, it doesn't matter if it's an abusive guy. They're looking for a replication of a situation with an abusive parent. So whether it was mother that was abusive and then they find, like, quote, the bad guy, unquote, or whatever the case, it's repetition compulsion cycles that somewhere inside of them they don't feel like they deserve to be treated any better than that. But again, I want to stress to people, this does not mean that they're going to stay with narcissists. I'm not saying all abusive guys are narcissists either, but I just wanted to add this in. They're not going to stay with the narcissist. It's not a good fit with the narcissist. They might get stuck there for a while, but the bottom line is they usually have an abusive parent, a borderline or a narcissistic parent, and let's face it, even the ones that don't maybe go with the worst of the worst, people that really don't have any of their stuff together and are abusive, they can't take in your kindness. So right there you have to think about the fact that they don't receive your love, they don't trust your love, they don't trust your kindness, and then if they actually go and end up with an abusive guy, they're not doing it consciously, but there is a tremendous subconscious pull to that kind of guy. Or woman for men with BPD. Hey Wills, how are you doing? Luke, thank you so much for that. You're very welcome, and that was very kind of you. Mike, that cleared a lot of confusion for me. Thanks, AJ. I've been following for a few months now. Well, I'm always glad to help, Mike, and I think that there's unfortunately, I shouldn't keep saying it this way, but there's no other way to say it. There's a couple YouTubers out there who misinform in ways that really matter, and tend to hurt a lot more men even than women, and they continue to say that, because the reality is, they don't even put it in this framework, but because the reality is that people with untreated BPD they don't know themselves, they don't like themselves, they kind of rather hate the sort of missing self, and often they've been abused in childhood, and so they can't trust, don't take in love, don't understand kindness, and kindness can really kind of straight up piss them off, and yet they want it, but they can't trust it. And so it doesn't mean that everybody with BPD ends up with a super abusive person or a down and out drug addict on the street, but some do. Or a narcissist. Some do. But I want everybody to hear me, whether you're male or female, with a female or male borderline. This has nothing to do with you. You know, it's not somehow that they think the bad guy or the bad woman or the chaotically ridiculous, dysfunctional, likely cluster B themselves they go to. It's not like those people are going to experience anything different, or that those relationships work out, or that you could have kept that person around effectively abusing you longer while you try to regulate their emotions, which is an impossibility, if you just were like meaner to them. Because it doesn't work that way. And when they find the meaner, abusive, or the narcissistic partner, then they're going to always be fighting back against that too. It becomes a freaking nightmare. And I mean, I've read clinical books on this, and I mean, it is the worst mix. I mean, probably a psychopath and a narcissist, or a narcissist and a borderline. These are ungodly relationships and trauma bonds. So it's not like the person with BPD just goes there and la 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 la, this is great, or they're in control. Not at all. Winstono, I think that is. Can BPD be treated, or do people learn to compensate? No, it can be treated, and it needs to be treated. Because even if people learn a little bit about, but see, compensating is usually overcompensating. And it comes out of defense mechanisms, so it's not healthy. So they really need treatment, and treatment can really help them to heal. But it can take 8 to 16 years, according to Dr. John Gunderson. And in my process in healing and recovering from BPD fully was about a 15 and a half year process. And luckily it started when I was 16. Mike, if you're looking for another topic, how does a BPD and bipolar 1 dual diagnosis exist together? Like how both conditions mix with someone and affect their life? Well, yeah, and more to the point, are many of these diagnoses accurate at all? I don't know. But yeah, it's something I want to do more on, because I do have one video out there that I think I talk about the difference between BPD and bipolar. So, but I'm not an expert in bipolar, and I really don't want to become one. So, but if there is BPD and bipolar that really is a dual diagnosis, then of course they're going to, each disorder is going to destabilize the other. And one of the major differences, obviously, in bipolar is that when people, which is more something that needs to be treated with medication, bipolar, when they are effectively treated with medication and they aren't rapidly or however cycling and going from mania to depression and back and forth, they don't act anything like people with BPD when they're in that really sort of, when they're, what would you call it? I don't know what you call it in bipolar. But when their bipolar is active and they're all over the map, when that's not the case, they're usually pretty stable people. So it's quite different from BP in that regard. But yeah, I will try to talk about that some more in videos in the future. Raquel, I thought BPD gets better with age, but my mental health deteriorating at age 35. Well, the APA says all this crap, and part of their crap is, borderline personality can just remit, whatever that means. It doesn't mean anything, actually, because it doesn't mean it goes away. What they mean is you might go from like 5 or 7 or 8 traits to 4, but you still have issues, probably, with those 4 traits. So I'm sorry to hear that you feel like your mental health is deteriorating because um, BPD does not get better with age automatically. I don't even know why they say this stuff. Frankly, it is the misogyny of the power center of psychiatry in the American Psychiatric Association, at least, that believes, I guess, that so much of BPD is, the hormonal factors of women's menstrual cycles. I really think, as inane and as ridiculous as it is to suggest, like, that's having a menstrual cycle and being female is not, quote, equal BPD. But I think that that's why they kind of say it gets better with age, because they think that when women go through perimenopause and menopause, that's going to, like, fix something. And I really think that's just utter nonsense. Not that women don't sometimes, I mean, all women, most women, when they're menstruating and premenstrual, will definitely have more feelings. There's good reason for that, and it can really impact people with BPD. But this is what I see as really inane, arcane, leftover misogyny when it comes to the way that the power center of psychiatry, I'm not saying every psychiatrist, looks at the female with BPD and says this kind of crap. Because it's no more true that it just gets better with age than it is that, like the origin that they think that it is. Like, oh, it's like, they've tried to float it's a brain disorder. They've tried to float it's a chemical imbalance. Well, most people aren't believing that stuff anymore. Maybe a lot still are. But they're trying to medicalize it. And it's not a medical problem. It's a psychological, emotional problem. And so a lot of what they say does not make sense. And then they try to say, oh, it's heritable and all this kind of stuff. But then they say, but the sensitive temperament child has to meet with an invalidating environment for this to happen. So, like, they can't make up their minds at all. Rab, cause of everything and all the blows, ups, and fights. Cause of everything and all the blow-ups and fights. Okay. Not sure what the context is, but that definitely happens, doesn't it? And I know I wasn't that innocent in my last relationship, but when my ex and I were friends for a while, she described our relationship as a roller coaster. When I tried to get her back, implying I was I guess there's more to come. But the relationships are roller coasters, but not because somebody with BPD describes it that way. It just kind of is the way it is, with the chaos and the drama and people with codependency walking on the eggshells. You can't walk on eggshells successfully, right? They have to crush under your feet. And the reality of that is, so you can't regulate the borderline's emotions, though people try and try and try. Trying to avoid this, trying not to say this, trying not to do that. When, I just want to make this crystal clear too. The triggers inside people with BPD are from their past and past trauma. And what triggers them in the here and now, you don't have to do anything wrong or inappropriate, and the person gets triggered, because you're not responsible for their triggers. They are. Of course, many of them don't know that. Mike, how frequent is drug abuse with someone who has BPD? Is it common for them to get on and get off of substance abuse? Well, I think there's a certain percentage, which I really wouldn't know what it is. It might not be the majority, or it could be half, or of those untreated. For a lot of people with BPD, yeah, there is some commonness to them abusing substances and having other issues like eating disorders and that type of thing. And that they can often, maybe go to rehab, or maybe in ways get off, or stop using alcohol and then start again, or whether it's drugs. But it's not all people with BPD again. So I just want to keep delineating that they're not all the same. And in my experience, when I had BPD, I never drank, I never used drugs, I wouldn't take psychiatric meds, I wasn't suicidal. Like, these are all the things about me that were, I guess, pretty atypical. And then I understand why that is now, but it doesn't matter in revisionist history. But not everybody with BPD is going to be the same. And so, but there is a frequent reality for a lot of people, especially with untreated BPD, and, to have substance abuse issues, for sure, and addictions. And sometimes it gets set off by the psychiatric meds as well. Not always, but sometimes. Dylan, it seems like everyone has signs of borderline nowadays. Well, I just think these personality disorders are increasing because there's increasingly throughout the generations parenting getting worse, not better. Situations getting worse in families of origin, not better. Not all of them, but probably more than not now, And so I don't know if everyone has signs of borderline nowadays or not, but there is an increase, and I don't know. Nobody knows how to measure that, but I would just say, by the very nature of, clients I've worked with over the past 30 years, I'm increasingly busier and busier all the time. Channels like mine and other people's, people are really looking for information, and unfortunately, people are coming brand new to this every day. Somebody's typing in right now somewhere in the world. They're typing in Google, my girlfriend or my wife or my boyfriend or my husband is doing this. What's that mean? And then they're going to find this. I've had so many clients describe this is how they found my channel, other channels, and they found out about BP, and then they started to learn. They're like, oh my God, this is what I've been going through. So, it's, and the way that BPD is defined, is really not adequate. Because I'm not saying it's not a serious mental illness if that's what people need to hear. I'm just saying it really is a trauma-based response, which then they've defined as a serious mental illness. It's very serious for sure. People lose themselves, and then people cannot, relate to other people, and the relationships are impossible. And nobody who's getting into a relationship with somebody with BPD, whether they know they have BPD or not, nobody knows what they're getting into. So it's just terrible. But I think that the delineation of borderline personality based on human traits, the pathologizing of human traits, that's a pretty slippery slope because we all have those human traits. So, and then, the only parsing of that they say is, well, they're more frequent and intense in those with BPD. So again, it's not the best measure or the best language. Alchemic Truth. I think the name BPD gets thrown around a lot. Sometimes people don't have that. BPD is pretty clear when someone has it, I think. Yeah, and I think there's a lot of people going through a lot of things in dating and relationships, and I don't know, maybe they think it's that. Maybe it isn't, but I'll just say clients I work with, I don't know if I've ever really worked with a client that was totally wrong about what they thought and about what they described their experience to be. Winstono, is a personality development it's a personality development gone wrong? Well, yeah, in infancy it starts with mother. It starts with misattunement, affect synchrony, crappy mirroring, if any, intermittent reinforcement, needs not being met consistently or congruently, and then by the age of 2, before or by the age of 2, there's an emotional arrest in the infant to toddler, because no human being can sustain going without those primal needs. And of course this happens to most who go on to be diagnosed with BPD, except for the smaller percentage where it's more perception based. It goes on, in a biological way, before there's cognitive ability or verbal ability, infants are experiencing a biological terror, a mounted cry of need for survival. And this over time, like Melanie Klein, the mother of object relation, says, which I quote often, abandonment trauma, and I would add in attachment trauma, which is the lack of mirroring, etc., the lack of bonding in a healthy way, the needs that go unmet in very early infancy to early toddlerhood. It creates the psychological death of the otherwise burgeoning authentic self. And this speaks to the emotional arrested development. And what that really means is the otherwise burgeoning, developing authentic self snaps right there, fragments off right there. And then what happens is the false self rises and everything is defense, defense, defense. It's the only way that human beings can survive this stuff. Mike, to Dylan's point, lots of young men tend to throw around the BPD self-diagnosis when they're abused in prior relationships. What's the rough estimate of BPD people in our population? I don't know, because I don't think it's changed for years. Don't they say it's something, doesn't the APA say it's something like 2%? Or some crazy little number like that? And I really think it's not 2%. I don't think any of their stats hold water, because there's, it'd be so hard to measure all these things anyway. But what percentage is it really at? I mean, there's no accurate answer for that, but I'd probably put it around at least 20 to 25%, which is super, super high. But it isn't 2% anymore. And we have more population. I mean, they just haven't changed that, to my knowledge, at all. Well, and I think lots of young men, and after, if they've been with a borderline woman, they do tend to feel either like they're a narcissist, or believe, rather, that they're a narcissist or they must be a borderline themselves. And this is often not the case. And then it's like, I have to say two things at the same time. People shouldn't self-diagnose, but then, see, I would look to psychologists more than psychiatrists for diagnoses, because you go to a psychiatrist these days, and I still think, even though there's a lot of men with BPD as well, you walk in there as a man with certain symptomology, you're going to end up maybe more often than not with diagnosed with NPD incorrectly. Just like females walk in, and whether it is BPD or it isn't, boom, it is. So, harder and harder, as people talk about, comments left on the channel, I hear from clients, it's harder and harder to trust the diagnoses of psychiatry. And of course, I'm sure there's still some good diagnosticians around, but where are they and who are they? And Mike said, is all BPD traced back to specifically mother and daughter relationship? What about a father? Well, it's traced back to the primary caregiver, which is usually mother. If the primary caregiver is father, and the same things happen, then it's going to be the same disaster. But normally fathers, even though they can try to be really involved in their children's life, of course, that it's the primary caregiver, okay, that's usually mother, it's that base that is, I think as Freud said, the first love object. As John Bradshaw said, that base that is the world, it is that base that actually, as human beings, we are wired to see that base, to respond to that base, to interact with that, because it is our world. It mirrors to us if we're okay or not. And it's that important. So that's why it often goes, it's not just mother and daughter, it could be mother and son. Many men have BPD. And or if you have a borderline mother or narcissistic mother, look out. Because this is not just a female thing at all, but I know a lot of men, I don't know, I have a lot of clients that are women too, but I've always dealt with more men, and even in live streams, so. But we have to remember that men have it too. There are men out there with BPD too. So it's not just about mother-daughter relationships, and fathers matter, and sometimes fathers can be a bit of a counterbalance, but they can't stop what's going to happen from early childhood from happening, because that's where usually the primary caregiver is mother, not always. So I just want to say that if the primary caregiver is a father who is borderline or a narcissist or emotionally unavailable or not attuned to the child and not providing what the child needs, the same thing will happen. And it will happen whether the child is with mother or father or whoever primary caregiver is, whether it's a male child or a female child. So those are just a couple things to keep in mind, that there's no exclusivity. And as much as there's difficulty between mothers and daughters, sons, especially of a cluster B parent, are going to really get wounded as well, whether that's mother or whether that's father. So, and both parents are important. I'm not trying to minimize the role of fathers at all, but there's so much that goes on with mothers because they're usually with the children. So it's the usual, the more common thing. And by the way, my opinion is a very strong one. But men, it's the gynocentrism of the institutions in society. If a man is with a cluster B woman, BPD, NPD, whatever, there's no freaking way the court should give custody to the woman. This is the gynocentric ridiculousness of what are the lies of feminism, which goes against women too, in part. So, and as I'm here being pro-male, I am not anti-woman. So, one doesn't cancel the other one out. Just because I always hear about it from women or maybe some men who just, like somebody said on that one video I did a while ago, a man said, you just outed yourself as an anti-feminist. Well, you don't have to be into all that rhetoric to be pro-men and pro-women. And to understand what's happening for men doesn't mean I don't care about women. It's not a contest, Well, yeah, Joe, that's pretty common. And, significant other with BPD-X. Okay, it's a little confusing. A lot of people with BPD will constantly fight against the diagnosis. And by the way, just as many men diagnosed with it as women, really. And, yeah, they either just have flat-out denial or they try to come up with other theories. That's pretty common and unfortunate because they're not going to get anywhere with that. Dylan, for me, I think I've learned how to grow up from it. For example, I no longer get mad at people for being in a relationship, etc. before me, which is illogical. Well, yeah, but again, I don't know if you relate to having codependency, but there might have been some woundedness in your childhood why you ever thought that way in the first place. Michael, hey there, said greetings. Emotionally dysregulated and confused fog clearing fellow humans. Yeah, that's a cool way to put it. Wheels, I'm doing okay, all things considered. Been setting some boundaries for myself with helping people. Finding a balance is hard, but I'm keeping myself from getting more burnt out than I am. Well, that's positive. That's really important. Good self-care. And Dylan said, I think the fact I worry about getting older and the plastic surgeries I've had may be tied to those traits. Well, that may likely well be tied to some woundedness. And so then it's a matter of, of figuring out what that goes back to. Well, Roller Girl says, yes, mom is the first person we love usually. Yeah, or we don't get to love, or we get hated by, or we don't get seen by, or whatever the case may be. For a lot of people, especially if that mom is a cluster B mom. Alchemic Truths. I come from a religious background and used to think my ex was possessed or something before I found out about BPD because her behavior was so abnormal. Everything would be fine and she would flip all of a sudden to be very cold and mean. Yeah, and actually, that flipping is really, like maybe a base state to devaluation, not necessarily idealization to devaluation. But, I, for one, don't know what to do when people say, I know you said you used to believe it. And maybe it does come from people more who have religious backgrounds, but this demon possession idea, it's sort of like, do people realize, I'm not saying this to you, Alchemic Truth, just in general, do people realize that if you want to say the borderline of the narcissist is demonically possessed, then how do you account for the fact that you'd like to also hold them accountable for their behavior? And do you believe that at the end of the day, even though they can't mount it and they can't get it unless they get into treatment, that they indeed do need to be held accountable for their behavior. And I've seen this blown on YouTube too. People saying, "No, they can't help it. It's not their fault." I wouldn't stop there. It is their responsibility now. It might not be their fault, but it's their responsibility, and that matters. So it's like other arguments that people make out there based on wild information or just cascading into information that makes it misinformation. That if you think, and like I said, I think there are women out there that are psychopathic. But if you want to forward, if I mean anyone wants to forward this secondary psychopathy, like supposed reality of the borderline woman, well then, how can you expect to hold them accountable? Because at the level of psychopath, it's like nobody can hold them accountable. So I'm just saying, there's these things always kind of at odds in people's own narratives. And I think I saw a comment on the channel earlier today that said that the person's ex with BPD even said herself that she felt demonically possessed. And I'm like, okay, but coming from somebody with BPD, that's pretty rich. It's probably obfuscation, or it's a magical belief, it's a feeling. Does it make it real or accurate, though? I would highly doubt it. And Luke said, yeah, same here. My ex would flip out. Well, remember, when you're describing flipping out, there's splitting, right? But yeah, flip out, okay. Over how much, quote, I care about her, unquote. Then the next morning be super aroused, let's say. And then another few hours later would start bawling her eyes out over not traveling enough. Well, it doesn't make any sense, does it, Luke? It's just incredible emotional triggers. And yeah, it's kind of always something. And you said 3 different extreme emotions within 24 hours. Yes. And sometimes people with BP can have way more than 3 in 24 hours. And of course, they're being triggered. And then they go to this dysregulated emotion and they don't know what it is. And so even what she said to you there, that she would flip out over how much, like, do you care about her, or do you care enough, etc. Probably not what the issue is. And then the next morning be super, aroused, okay. And then whatever that might be about, is, hard to say for sure. And then another few hours later would be bawling because she, doesn't travel enough. Well, here's the thing. Really, were those the reasons, or were those the things she just grabbed at because she has no idea what she's feeling? So a lot of that goes on too. I mean, she might have known she was feeling aroused, but the other thing, she might not have known why she was feeling them. And people with BP often will park their dysregulated, triggered emotion onto just anything. So, like, yeah, crying because she wasn't traveling enough, which may or may not have been the case, or it could have been something entirely different, but that's what she blamed on it, or blamed, her emotions on. And Luke said, and she'd cycle faster and faster near the end of our relationship, but she never wanted me to, quote, leave, unquote. Yeah, no. The classic, I hate you, but don't leave me. Get away closer. And it's like, nothing is clear. It's all mixed messages. It's all black or white. Very dichotomous. Alchemic Truth said, so similar experience as well. Wins Tono. If a person has some psychological insight, could a relationship be the fastest way to work through their BPD? No. Because you know what? There is no fastest way. There is no faster way. This is deep, entrenched, daunting, difficult, extremely painful work that people with BPD need to do if they will actually commit to doing that. And so if they have psychological insight, what does that mean, by the way? Because they probably have intellectual insight that's not in their emotional reality or landscape, and which is not a place from which they will take action or be able to take action to change their relational difficulties, the triggers, or their behavior. So I would say categorically no, that if they have some, whatever psychological insight means, but any insight whatsoever, the relationship is not going to be the fastest way to work through the BPD. The relationship is going to continue to be a roller coaster up and down, rather probably at that point blocked to not only people with codependency's recovery, but maybe to a person with BPD's recovery, because they need therapy. Just like more and more we know now today, codependents need therapy as well to heal. But people with BPD need therapy. This is not a partner job, a relationship job, a couples counseling deal. All of those things are rather disasters. Drone spot, idealization for 2 years, then devaluation for imagined abandonment, then cheated on me. I broke up, but got suicidal threats, and she spent days in front of my house, got back, then happened again. Is this BPD? Certainly sounds like it from what you're saying. I mean, I can't say with 100% of surety, but certainly sounds like part of that pattern. Yeah, sorry you went through that. I'm just scrolling here as the window does not cooperate as usual. Wheels, quote, you just outed yourself as an anti-feminist, unquote. When you've got so many wounded women using modern feminism to wound innocent men, is that really a bad thing? Maybe it's not all bad, but we can't ignore how bad it's gotten. No, I agree. We can't ignore how bad it's gotten. And the fact of the matter is, being pro-men doesn't make me anti-women, but I'm not making, not making any statement on feminism, because the iterations of it now are just insane. What can I say? And it's funny, because in the family of origin that I have no contact with, there's a relative there who I think got her PhD in women's studies, and is probably one of those. You know what I'm saying? I think she's around 29 or 30 now, but it's like, wow. And we never got to know each other, but because it's a golden child, Narc's oldest kid. But the thing is, it seemed like there was a lot of patterns of similarity in our life, like, in terms of themes and things. That I kind of heard through the grapevine, or some things I saw online that she posted years ago. But the thing is that, including that she had BPD, by the way, among other things, what was I going to say about that? Yeah, so now, even if there will be no relationship. I mean, I get that. I don't, it's long since gone. And I'm over that now. Worked through that. But, I probably wouldn't even want to know her today. So I can't imagine myself having a conversation. Oh, I could sit patiently and listen, but I wouldn't agree with anything. That this third, fourth, fifth, now the fifth wave of radical left feminists, whatever they would have to say, I'm sure I wouldn't be interested. So, because, there are lies within feminism, and I do need to go into this more deeply, and I don't know if it'll be on the channel or on my website, but much more coming to ajmahar.co. You might want to check out once in a while, but there's not a whole lot going on there right now. But the thing is, there's so many lies within feminism that aren't just important to say, to acknowledge what men are going through today, but more to the point, and I mean, it affects women negatively too. It's just ridiculous what really that's about. Dimebag, can being friends with an ex with BPD work? No, and absolutely not no. And why would anybody want to be friends with somebody that couldn't love you, that hurt you, that abused you, that treated you like crap? Why would they be a better friend, and why would you want them as a friend? Down the rabbit hole. Hey there. A panic attack flipping out is splitting? Question mark. Not necessarily. A panic attack flipping out there's been a trigger there to dysregulated emotion for sure, to the panic and whatever they're feeling, and they might not know what that is, but they're having a panic attack. But since it's a triggered thing, it's hard to say if they don't split with that. But maybe not always, because somebody with BPD having a panic attack might really approach in desperate neediness and not necessarily splitting to value you. So I don't know that there might be a component of splitting in there, but it might not be like regular splitting, because when they're having panic attacks, they're usually freaking out and looking for help because they don't know what to do. And panic attacks are often triggered emotional dysregulation of past trauma that they are not consciously aware of. I went through that. Michael, Dimebag, it depends how strong your boundaries are. I don't think, you know what it depends on even more than that? It depends on the individual person with BPD, because they're not all the same. But I would say, I mean, I don't think I've had very many clients over 30 years that, in trying this, that it ever worked out. And so I think to say it depends on how strong your boundaries are, the question is still, why would you want to do that, and why is that good for you? And then the other thing that brings up is, and are you really going to be in the friend zone, or are you still really going to be hoping for more, if even you're not consciously aware of it? Maybe like if they're going to treatment or something. Hi there, Tom. From Denmark. Cool. Jordan, hey Jay, it's been a while. Hope you're doing well and staying safe in these crazy times. Yeah, I am. Thank you. I hope you are too. Alchemic Truth. It makes sense, AJ. How do you think it's the best way to tell someone with BPD they need to seek help? Well, unlike newer YouTubers again who keep saying, oh, you should tell them they might have BPD and blah, 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 blah. It's really not your responsibility. It's really not your job. It's really not the best thing for you to do. So that's the number one thing to think about. And that's always kind of been the standard response of, not, well, me, but others as well, and other professionals. And up until recently, I think, people that wrote books too, because online now you can find all kinds, like just websites. These treatment center websites say all kinds of crazy stuff, which might be applicable if actually you can afford their $50,000 plus program a month, and your loved one with BPD is in there and they can actually work magic. Then all the things they say that people could do to help the borderline might work, but they don't work when the person's untreated, for sure. So the best way to tell someone they have BPD is not to do it, because it's not your job, it's not your responsibility, and you need to radically accept that a relationship isn't working out at some point, and you need to get yourself out of it. And then seeking to tell them that they have BPD and they need help is still rescuing them. It's still trying to regulate them somehow. It's still trying to... So, I mean, if you're going to try it, I don't know. The best way to do it would be via text, or as you're running out the door. Because who wants to hang around for the fallout? Who wants to hang around for the reaction? It's best not to be the messenger. Whoops, just a second. The scrolling window's gone berserk again. And I think more and more today, people are trying to tell people that they believe they have BPD and that they need to get help. But it's something that from quite a while ago was always frowned upon, and really isn't in people's best interest. Tom, that's ultimately their own decision, buddy. Well, everything is ultimately everybody's own decision, but yeah, people with codependency might still trying to be regulating or affecting or, trying to help or rescue somebody with BPD. They keep negating themselves in the process. Tom, and it ain't gonna matter if you tell them straight up or not. Yeah, I agree with that 100%. Because if they're going to get there, if they're going to figure it out, if they're going to seek treatment, they'll get there when they're ready to get there, and not a minute before, no matter what you say. Michael, yep, it will not be received well. Yep, that's very true most of the time. And even if it is received not horribly, it doesn't mean that they're going to do anything about it, or believe it, or hear it, or, yeah. And Tom said, it's like trying to get a drug addict to quit drugs without their motivation being there, man. Impossible. Yeah. RJ, hey there. I tried to be friends with my ex, but she kept putting spyware on my computer. Yeah, that would kind of make it not so pleasant, for sure, and then some. I have a live stream, by the way. If you and check my community tab from time to time for topic lists of various videos I've done and things as I try to post them there. And I posted on the community tab recently a live stream I did a while back on can you be friends with the borderline X. So just know, I mean, I haven't covered everything quite yet, but there's a lot out there that I have already done videos or live streams about that just might give you some food for thought or something else to think about. I don't know who's Roy Jones. I don't know. Down the rabbit hole. So when you're arguing with them and they're talking about something totally ridiculous, or they're projecting, is that splitting? Yeah, well, there's an inherent split to devaluation that usually begins the argument. And it can often be that you were close prior to that, which is too close, and then they have to create an argument and some drama because they've split to devalue because they feel controlled and now they need distance. And then if they get distance, then they feel like you abandon them. And so these are all reasons and involved in splitting why they will seek chaos and drama, because they don't know what they're feeling and they don't know if they're coming or going, but it's repetition compulsions, things experienced in childhood, and it's what they do going forth in relationships. So talking about something totally ridiculous, they're projecting. Yeah, that's splitting, because they're already triggered too, and they're in an emotionally dysregulated place, and what that ridiculous stuff they're talking about that you can't even follow is really from their past and being aimed at you. Oh, and just a second here. This thing won't let me just scroll up one or two comments. No. And could you please define splitting when they are doing it? Well, I think define it when they're doing it is not really a different definition than when one just defines it, but they don't know when they're doing it because it's a defense mechanism and they're not consciously aware of what they're doing, and they're not consciously aware of when it's happening or what's happening. But for somebody who's sitting beside someone with BPD or across the room, I think they've split you to a devaluation when you're having a totally ridiculous argument and they're projecting and you don't know what the hell's going on because none of it makes any sense. Then you're looking at triggered, emotional dysregulated, split to devaluation in real time in that situation. Gaddis. I suspect my wife has BPD. We have 3 sons, 6-year-old twins, and an 8-year-old. I found out about BPD only in August this year. Had consultation with a psychiatrist. Will divorce soon. Well, and I really hope that, that divorce is one that you can make sure that you get as much custody as possible of your children. Because again, untreated borderline women should never be left with the children. And men have to fight like hell, depending, in most countries around the world. And that's gynocentrism at work because it's crazy. It's absolute craziness. But I'm sorry to hear what's going on. But that you'll be divorcing soon is positive, and then hopefully you can get the best custody arrangement you can get to be with your children and to help them out. Drone Spot, is BPD more common for adopted children? Interesting, that because there is a higher correlation now between adoption and BPD, but not all children that are adopted get BPD. So, but yeah, there are more kids that get adopted that have BPD that end up diagnosed with BPD than maybe people ever thought before. And you said, my ex got big abandonment issues, unregulated emotion, and impossible to find triggers. No, the triggers aren't impossible to find if they would go to therapy. But otherwise, they're not going to be very apparent for sure. Well, that sounds positive, Wheels, and connecting with God, and yes, try not to go down the rabbit holes. It's not getting easier to try to not go down them. I think. I mean, I sometimes do, and I sometimes don't. Um, well, I'm glad you think somebody else's advice is the best ever, because you should probably tell them that. I don't think she got, yeah, some okay work out there, but I wouldn't wholly agree with it. Or her methodology, or, yeah, never mind. I happen to know some things first person and up close personal from former clients of hers. Michael, my ex contacted me yesterday because she found out I have corona. Oh, I'm sorry to hear that. I hope you're doing well with that, or as well as can be expected. And you replied, quote, I'm all good, thanks, unquote. And now I'm here to get a little H.A. Mahari refresher to keep me on top of my game. Oh, well, I hope that you find it helpful. And, uh, it's interesting when they contact for the reasons that they do, because, they can mean well, but it can just be so misleading at the same time. Down the rabbit hole. So the more you show them love, and the more you care about them, the more they'll split. Yes. And that has all to do with the trauma that 87% of those diagnosed with BPD have gone through in childhood. And in working with clients with BPD and in using schema therapy and measuring those schemas, like by assessment scales. I mean, it's not uncommon for people with untreated BPD or just starting treatment to score 98, 97, 95% distrust in that particular schema and pattern. So they just don't have any reference for it in their experience, is one just straight up way to put it. Oh, I'm glad that your children will be staying with you. That's excellent. That's good. Sometimes that happens, but it doesn't happen as much as one would hope. Um, oh, that's good, yeah, because things are a little bit more difficult in the USA in lots of ways, but probably in Canada too. Hey there, Rob Chili, how you doing? Um, so I wonder if people who are maybe newer to this really understand that so much of what you're doing and how you're trying to make the relationship work and all these other moving pieces is really that you are trying to take responsibility to regulate the borderline's emotions. And it's not doable, it's not possible, and it's not the responsibility of anyone else. And when they don't choose therapy to learn how to regulate their own emotions and go deeper in therapy, then this is the beginning of the relational impossibility. I'm glad you're doing a bit better every day. That's great. Because one day at a time, for sure. So I think it's just interesting that, when I know with clients too, when they express the walking on the eggshells, but the very nature of walking on eggshells, or that hypervigilant trying to be really careful, or should I say this, or should I do that, or should I not, that all kind of falls into people with codependency trying to regulate the borderline's emotions. And it's another big aspect of how people really are losing themselves to that, because it develops its own hypervigilant pattern, with people with codependency. Not that they don't maybe already have, many people, some kind of, to one degree or another, hypervigilant pattern in the first place. Because one of the things, so many things about codependency, but one of the things about codependency that people struggle with a lot is, over caring about how other people think about you, which goes usually back to, what a parent did or didn't or couldn't give, or what somebody felt was a negative experience that was really impacting with a parent. Um, yeah, Wheels, you said the rabbit hole thing is hard for me, especially when I'm already depressed. Got to keep my mind active and always got a million questions. Um, so you've decided to go down more innocent. I guess there's more to come. Um, Winstone, could you work through your own codependent issues by being in a relationship with a borderline? No, if you take responsibility for self, not other. Um, Not really. Like, you might get somewhere. You might be able to enact some boundaries. You might be able to change some things, but it's really not possible to heal when there's still going to be a lot that will probably be happening, even if you're trying to do it differently, be really difficult. So, and again, if the person with BPD isn't in therapy, and even if they are, then the person with codependency should be in their own therapy. And then you said, I mean, since nature seems to bring these types together so frequently. Yeah, but that doesn't mean nature brings it's not nature, by the way, it's early childhood experiences. But when people are brought together, people with codependency and borderlines, or people with codependency and narcissists, it doesn't mean you're brought together to work it out. Not at all. Yeah, you need to work it out after. You need to find your own healing and recovery. It is a window into your own woundedness from childhood and what codependency is all about. But this trauma bond is not a bond that then can be made healthy by working within it, if that makes any sense. And with all due respect, it sounds like there's some denial there. I don't know, but I don't want to be insulting at all. Rap Chili, basically they split and feel engulfed if you treat them well, and hate and abuse you back if you treat them poorly, right? Well, they can hate and abuse you because you treated them well too. So it's not always that black and white. Like, it could be on either side of like kind of reasons why they split. Fear of engulfment, fear of abandonment, that approach avoidance conflict. It's always going on. And it is really about how they have disorganized attachment too, and that's why they're never going to really attach to you either. And you said my ex really hated her abusive father and had violent fantasies of revenge. Yeah, and guess who she projected those out onto? You. Because she can't see the difference between you and him. Not unless a lot of therapy. Wheels, rabbit holes more often, more innocent rabbit holes more often, like learning a bunch of stuff about radios or something like that. Yeah, not exactly a rabbit hole by definition, but I get what you're saying. Rap Chili, I'm not as caught in that, quote, they'll stay with NPD's narrative, but I'm still a bit confused as how NPDs can hurt BPDs so much if BPDs don't attach. It happens during BPD. It happens during BPD idealization? Question mark. Let me think about that for a minute. Well, NPDs can hurt people with BPD who don't attach by the very nature that it's a trauma bond on steroids. So people with BPD are looking and unconsciously going to find in narcissists, they're going to find the re-experiencing repetition compulsion in real time. Plus it's going to be going on in them internally, which they're not really aware of what that is unless they seek significant treatment. So the reason that they get hurt is they're going to experience continual rewoundedness on top of their unhealed and unaddressed woundedness, often from a narcissistic parent. So people don't have to attach to anybody to be really hurt. I don't know, is that maybe people's first idea? They have to be really attached? Because so much of the stuff with cluster Bs, there's no love there. There's no healthy, adult, consistent, congruent love whatsoever. And there's no attachment. And so with that, maybe where you're coming from with that is that people with codependency, not that it's secure attachment either, but you may well feel more attached to the borderline. And the borderline isn't attached to you. But wow, I feel like I'm cleaning up somebody else's mess here for you because maybe you listen to them. I don't know. Um, but NPDs hurt everybody. So whether attached or not, let me just put it that way. Have you ever had a narc landlord? I have. There was no attachment either way. What a pain in the frickin' butt. Because they're targeting rabid, purposeful abusers, more narcissists than not. And that's not what people with BPD are, or more of them than not aren't. So again, there's no need for attachment for people with BP to get hurt by a narcissist, and narcissists will get hurt by borderlines as well, because borderlines will lash back out in ways that will give the narcissist narc injury after narc injury, but then they're going to double down to punish the border. It's just a like circle from hell that. But thanks to somebody out there who can't kind of say anything that makes sense, people got this in their heads. At least I don't know where else it would come from. Or maybe there's more than one source. Down the rabbit hole. Wow, you are the best to explain this. Thank you. And you make this so much easier. Well, you're very welcome, and I just do my best. And you know, if it makes something easier or just helps people to clarify something or even think about something in a different way, those are all probably things that, you know, I hope that they're helpful. So, I think, Rap Chili, that, you know, it would really help you to try to let that whole narrative go. Because I don't know what other people are saying about that, but most people that talk about narcissistic abuse and narcissistic personality don't really talk about borderlines. I don't know how many of them might do videos on when they get together. But I know that there's been some misinformation out there that the borderline will whip the narcissist's ass. It's like, please, excuse me, really? No, not at all. People with BPD get just as wounded as anybody would by a narcissist. So I don't know. I mean, I'm aware of a couple places where that crazy narrative comes from. But it's just people's own, I don't know, ideas or illusions, delusions. I don't know why anybody would say some of that stuff. Because those relationships, let me just reiterate, they do not last. They do not work out. Though there can be some aberrant ones, some unusual ones that the people will stay together no matter what they're doing to each other. This happens also with some people with codependency and some borderlines. It really does. But one of the worst fits in trauma bonds and relationship, like, you know, these relationships, is definitely the borderline and the narcissist. Rap Chili, yeah, I'm already in much better headspace and accepting more and more that a relationship with an untreated BPD simply doesn't work. But I was still trying to understand. Well, and again, you know, is that helping you now, or is that maybe just getting in your way? Only you can decide that. I just asked the question. Because, again, you know, you need to be focusing more on yourself. And you said, I mean, accepting it emotionally, logically. I've already accepted it long ago. Yeah, well, you different levels of emotional acceptance and working through it, yes, and moving forward. I understand what you mean. And remember that logically is compelling, but emotionally healing is far more important for breaking free. And that's something I think a lot of people with codependency get kind of stuck in, is this, you know, intellectual trying to understand more and more and more and more, when clearly, if, you know, working on one's emotions in recovery process, usually, you know, it's best to work with a professional, is far more important, and focusing on self, which is really hard for a lot of people with codependency. Not everybody with codependency is the same. Some people can make that shift at a certain point and make that and really focus on self, and some people with codependency are, even when I'm working with them, extremely uncomfortable with the idea of focusing on themselves. And so there can be a lot of protective obfuscation of getting to that work. that then is a challenge for me to try to help people to gently keep, reframing and bringing them back to it. Drone Spot. I noticed big emotional roller coasters and 3 BPD girls related to cold season or bad weather. Did you notice this with your clients? Not really. I think the only thing I don't know much about, I've heard, I've heard a couple of people say that recently. I don't know what that's about. I think the only thing that really, in bad weather, cold weather, people live in climate with winter, and the darker days of winter, and then, I mean, I don't get depressed, but I don't, when you look out, or, days when we used to be out more, when the trees are just sticks, you know what I mean? But then they're usually buried in snow. But we don't get the kind of winters we used to. But long story short, I think seasonal affective disorder might play into that. And so some people with BPD may have that. I don't think it's really the actual BPD. And if they really had that strong a reaction to darker, colder, worse weather that people can find a little bit drab, and we all get sick of by close to the end of winter or midwinter, especially if it's been a long cold one or a very, very cloudy one. But people with more heightened sensitivity, people with BPD, people without BPD, can get seasonal affective disorder. So, and in which case, actually, those lamps they have for that can really help. So, I don't know that it's just BPD. I don't have any, haven't had people with BPD report to me necessarily, except a couple that had seasonal affective disorder, that winter or cold weather, bad weather, put them on an emotional roller coaster, so to speak. But then, for some people with BPD, that could happen in the sense that maybe that's when they were traumatized. Maybe it's fused together with trauma triggers that they're not aware of. So that's another possibility. But I don't think it's a general correlative factor across a multitude of people with BPD or anything like that. And again, remember that BPD is not just in women. I'm just going to keep making that point. Wheels. I used to do that a lot more before things got so doom and gloom. I've been researching the origins of modern Christianity lately. I'm hoping it'll help with some questions I have. Well, it can both help and confuse. Let me just forewarn you on that. Because, I believe that in Christianity there is an element of, and I'm not, fundamentalist or Christian enough for most Christians or anything like that, but I think there's an element where no matter how much you parse it out, you read, you learn, you try to make logical sense out of it, there's a place where you either take a leap of faith or you don't. And that's, I think, what really is difficult for people. So I think you'll find information that will help with some of your questions, and equally information that won't. So that's the very nature of kind of questioning in that regard, I think. I mean, I don't know. Maybe other people experience it differently. Oh, Luke, wow, thank you. I have to head off, but thanks again from all of us for taking the time with our questions. You shed light on things I've been thinking about. Well, I'm really glad to be helpful, and thank you so much again for yet another generous donation. Really appreciate it. And so yeah, maybe I've said all I have to say. I don't know if anybody else has anything to say. Let me think. But I guess I'll just say it's very common for people with codependency, among all other things, to really be trying to regulate the borderline's emotions, and you might not realize that that's what you're really doing, but it is. And yes, could be said that people with codependency are doing that for their own self-preservation. But again, if you have to try to regulate someone else's emotions and focus that much on them and abandon yourself, does that sound like a tenable or remotely reasonable relationship to stay in. And I know it's not easy for people to let go. I know it's not easy for people to make these choices. But for people with codependency, it's even harder because it's going to take you back to something from your childhood. It doesn't always have to be something horrible, but something that really impacted you when you were young. Whatever that age might be, it's not the same for everybody with codependency. But I think a lot of people with codependence are, understandably wanting to learn more about people with BPD, etc., of course, or NPD, or whatever the case. But it's, like I keep saying, so important that you start getting into your own process of healing and recovery and focus on yourself, which is something that codependents actually don't do very well. Wheels, I can attest to struggling with fall and winter a lot. My worst trauma happened around this time of year. That and the fact that it's cold and dark make this time of year hard. Well, yeah, and I guess, it's like you said, related to, unfortunately, some of your worst trauma. And I don't know, I guess it just depends on people's, aside from if people were traumatized around this time of year or when it gets really cold. I don't even know that it gets, for me, it doesn't get really cold anymore. Like, what, 3 days a year? Because when I was a kid growing up, good Lord, it would be freezing for weeks. Because, there is something going on with the climate change, right? But I don't know, I think people can find season changes difficult for the reason you gave, Wheels, and then more to the point, the reason aside from that. Personally, I love the dark, so when it gets darker earlier, I'm like, right on. I don't have a problem with that. And I love cold. I love winter. I've always loved winter, so it just doesn't. I mean, if it was a really super sloppy one and there's a lot of slush and muck and you're sliding all over the place and that kind of thing, but I mean that's what I grew up with, and so I really kind of flow with each season myself. Wheel said, plus having to play extra nice with Psycho and the Foo. Well, yeah, but I don't think that's seasonally related, is it? But, well, maybe, because if you can get out more in the summer, that makes a big difference too. If we can get out more at all in this day and age, but just saying. So that's another thing that I think is probably not making winter, which I guess isn't officially here or anything, but we do have snow in Ontario today, and there was snow the other day or yesterday, I don't remember. But like I'm not overly focused on weather very much, so mostly it was in the summer. Was nice days, but could I get my butt in the right place on the balcony when the sun would be there? So I had that kind of timed, but often would miss it because I was working. But I guess it's what we're focused on. Focus is so important. And I know myself, like, and even in what's going on, the uncertainty of the world, and what is it really all about, where is it headed to, what's it going to do, is it going to be alleviated someday, is it going to change, is it going to get better, or is this just the beginning of a slide to something we can't even imagine? I don't know. But the point is, what we have to do is watch where we put our focus. It's true not only for people with codependency to learn how to stop over focusing on the borderline, which usually means you need your own healing and recovery, and it doesn't usually take place in the trauma bonded relationships, nor do people with BPD usually get treated from within those relationships either. And if people do, often the relationships will not come back together anyway, because people really heal and change and grow, and then you're just looking for something entirely different. But I guess focus is really important when people bring up the weather, etc., because or seasons changing, because those are things we don't have any control over, right? And so again, if people are focusing on and being largely affected by things that they can't control, including, unfortunately, when times of abuse were worse in people's lives, it's really important to really pay uber attention to what you're focusing on and try to shift that focus onto something that will be less painful and hopefully helpful and maybe even healing and restorative, as well as sometimes just outright distracting. Rap Chili. I've been focusing more on myself as of late, recording and producing music. Oh, cool. Sounds wonderful. It helped. It's really important to try to shift the focus from the cluster B, or at least a bit, if anything. Oh, yeah, it is really important to shift that focus. And that is the thing that's probably, among other things, one of the most difficult things for people with codependency to do. And shift the focus onto self and all that healing and recovery. In Wheels, it probably has much more to do with the holidays and the fact that escaping Psycho was harder for me this time of year. Yeah, that makes sense. And then again, too, I think holidays, wow. People continue to put themselves through torture with holidays. I stopped doing that a long time ago in my life. So I know that Americans have Thanksgiving coming up. In Canada, we had Thanksgiving in October. Um, Something that most Americans don't seem to ever remember, because people say Happy Thanksgiving to me so much as if I'm an American. But hey, anyway, I don't give energy or focus to holidays if it has anything to do with my past or what they used to be like. I built some um, new sort of, what would you call them? Not habits, but routines, I guess, and structure on holidays, or then sometimes lack thereof. Or I'm often, even now I'm in a relationship now this year, so it's going to be more of a challenge, but I may still well end up working Christmas Day. It happens a lot. And then I have clients from other areas of the world that I'll be talking to on the U.S. Thanksgiving, because most Americans don't want to have their sessions on that day, which is interesting because on Canadian Thanksgiving, Canadians still have their sessions, just saying, but I don't know about around the world. Oh, thank you for that down the rabbit hole. I appreciate that. Thank you so much. So with that, anyway, hopefully this gives food for thought. And just realize if you have codependency and you're still with a borderline, or you're not sure if it's over and you're in that on-off in-between place, it's not your responsibility to regulate the borderline's emotions, and more people with codependency than not are doing that in these relationships, and maybe without being aware of it, but then you're also losing yourself more to that focus on trying to avoid the, eggshell cracking and the triggers of the borderline. And I think a lot of people with codependency really do believe, as people with BPD make you believe, or scream and yell at you and blame you so much, that somehow if you just didn't do or say this or that, they wouldn't be triggered. And that's utterly nonsensical and not true. It's just them projecting out on you and blaming you, and it isn't your fault. So with that, everybody take care. And yeah, you take care too, Wheels.